As you heard, my name's Joe Kissell, and I'm an author. I've written a lot of books, and a couple of years ago, a weird thing happened. I actually bought the publishing company that was publishing my books, so now I've also added a publisher's cap. So I want to tell you about, there we go, about misconceptions. Tech misconceptions. And you know, I have a couple of kids. Well, I have like an adult kid, but I also have a couple of young kids at home. And I'm going to use them as examples to help me share with you some things that I've learned and that may help you to overcome tech misconceptions. So here's the story. Several years ago, I realized that I was getting a lot of email from my readers, people who read my books and articles, that didn't just show that they didn't know how something worked, but that they thought they knew how something worked and they were just a little bit off. And unfortunately, that mismatch between what they expected and what they got caused a lot of grief. So I wrote this series of articles called Flipped Bits that talked about common tech misconceptions, and then later on I expanded those articles into a full book, which I'll tell you about later on. So anyway, in the process of writing those articles in that book, I realized that the people who were asking these vexing questions reminded me in both good ways and bad ways of my young children. So I use my kids for a lot of examples, and I'll be doing that today too. All right, so we're going to start with the very basics when it comes to computers, and that's this, right? So we're going to talk about the notion of a flipped bit, both literally and figuratively. So in computing, we all know a bit is just a value that can be a 1 or a 0. And we know that 8 bits make a byte, and 1024 bytes make a kilobyte, and so on up through megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes and beyond. Everything a computer does, storing data, running programs, is based on storing and changing the values of bits. When a 0 changes to a 1 or a 1 changes to a 0, that's called flipping a bit. But when techies talk about a flipped bit, they usually mean it kind of as an insult, a little bit. They mean an error. Oh, that guy's got a flipped bit, an incorrectly flipped bit. There's nothing wrong with a 1 changing to a 0 or a 0 to a 1, but when you get something wrong, that's a flipped bit. Now, in computers, sometimes bits get flipped inadvertently. There was a programming error. There was a mechanical failure, media degradation. Sometimes, and this is true, a cosmic ray randomly striking your hard drive can flip a bit, and other things too. And unfortunately, a single flipped bit, whether a 1 should be a 0 or a 0 should be a 1, can mean the difference between a program succeeding and failing. So just take a glance at these strings of numbers here. You might think that they look very, very similar. If you look very, very closely, you'll see that 6 digits in, the top line has a 1, the bottom line has a 0. Now, this top line, that string of 1s and 0s, happens to be the binary representation of the word win. So those first 8 1s and 0s together make the letter W. And if you just change one of those 1s to a 0, you get a completely different word with a completely different meaning. You just turned a win into a sin. So my point is that little things mean a lot, and they mean a lot not just in terms of computers, but in your brain too. So a flipped bit is, for our purposes today, a tiny error, seemingly insignificant on its own. Well, there's just one tiny thing that's different. But if the wrong bit is flipped, an entire system can break down. So metaphorically, a flipped bit could manifest itself as a tiny flaw in the way we think about something that has a disproportionate effect in the real world. Now, I want to be clear about this. Even though the techies might say, oh, that guy has a flipped bit, and mean it as an insult, it's not your fault. You should not feel blame or shame or remorse over getting something wrong. We all get stuff wrong. I've been in the tech field for decades, and I know a lot about computers, but boy, have I made some dumb mistakes. But I don't waste time fretting over that. We all get things wrong, and I will give you some, I think, some great examples of some things that are commonly misconstrued. You don't have to feel bad about it. You don't have to feel like you are, and you're going to have to turn in your geek badge because you've made, because you have a flipped bit. You should regard each of these things as, oh, hey, I learned a new thing. This is an opportunity for me to correct what's in my head. And so once I know more, I can be better at using my devices. So don't, you might hear some stories in just a moment that make you feel, oh, I've been doing that and I feel really dumb now. It's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. We all do. All right. I'm going to talk about mental models. Now this, yeah, it's like a fancy psychological term, but I'm just going to keep this really simple. How you think about things, or how the way you think things works, affects how you use and experience them. So we see some machine, we might try to guess what's inside it, how it works. And this just happens automatically, even without trying. Our mental image of what's inside the machine or how it works helps us to predict how it will work in the future and what we should do to get a desired result. So a metaphorical flipped bit in our mental model results in a misconception, of which I have encountered countless examples in my decades of writing about technology. So I'm all about correcting the mistakes in those mental models. Once you have a better mental model about what happens behind the scenes in an app or a gadget or a service, you'll be able to make better decisions about how to use it, and you'll save yourself time and aggravation. Now, kids start building mental models at a very early age. So one day we were driving with some friends of ours, and one of their kids was in the car. He was about 2, and as he looked out the car window, he saw this. Now, this 2-year-old was terrified, and he started yelling at the plane to turn so it wouldn't hit the moon. Now, his simplistic mental model of the sky was that everything up there was equally far away, which is reasonable enough because we can't, even as adults, accurately judge sizes and distances when things are so far away. We thought it was funny. we had to calm him down, you know. But what we were really learning was something about the way the brain works. Now, you might think you are immune to this problem as an adult, but my experience writing about technology tells me that most of us still have at least some mistaken mental models. And not just about apps and cloud services and whatnot, also about ordinary household items like this one. Now, this is not a Nest. This is a dumb, old-fashioned analog thermostat. This is what you probably grew up with, or at least what I grew up with in my house. So there was this really interesting study done about how people use this type of thermostat. And so this researcher hooked up some equipment, and over a period of weeks, he would measure the temperature in the house every hour, and he would also check on the setting on the thermostat. You know, was it set higher, set lower, set to what temperature every hour for weeks, and he collected all this data, and then he analyzed it for a bunch of different homes. And then he had some ideas about what this data meant, so he went on to interview some of the occupants of these homes about how they used thermostats and how they imagined that they worked. And so his data showed that people had two ideas about how thermostats work. Now, I'm going to refer. He referred to these as folk theories. I'm going to refer to them as mental models. We're really talking about the same thing. It's the picture we have in our heads of what's going on behind the scenes, even if we don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes. So the first group of people and this is, again, this is not just his idea, his imagination, this is what the data showed, and this is what was backed up by the interviews, was what he referred to as the valve theory. So what he would find is that in a lot of houses, the temperature in the house would fluctuate a lot during the day, and of course these fluctuations would correspond with changes in the thermostat setting. You know, people would set it to 80 degrees for a while, then they'd set it down to 60, and then they'd set it to 70, and they'd keep changing the temperature on it. And so what this researcher thought was going on, and what he confirmed by actually asking people, was that this group of people believed that what they were doing when they were changing that number on the thermostat was changing the amount of heat coming out of their furnace. So they're, you know, a higher number meant hotter air. Okay, hotter air if you put the number higher, colder air if you put the number lower, and that does make sense, right? That is a reasonable thing to do. If you see a dial with numbers on it and you want a hotter, you want your house to be hotter, of course you're going to put it to a hotter number. So people were saying they believed that a thermostat worked kind of like the gas pedal on a car. You push down harder, more gas goes through, and so the engine goes faster. Or like a water faucet, you turn it on more and a greater volume of water comes through. And that was their idea of how a thermostat worked. And so that led them to make certain decisions about how they used their thermostat. So if they came home and their house was cold, they would turn the thermostat way up, turn it up to 80, up to 90, under the theory that that would put out hotter air and make their home warm up faster than if they set it to the actual temperature that they wanted it to be, let's call it 70. So then there was a second group of people that had a different notion of how a thermostat worked. And this researcher called this the feedback theory. And according to the feedback theory, the thermostat is sort of like a switch that gets feedback from the environment, namely like a thermometer, right? And then it opens or closes, turns on or off this switch that activates or deactivates the furnace accordingly. So in this mental model, or this theory, there's basically a thermometer inside there, and you set the thermostat to the temperature you want. Let's say it's 70 degrees. And when the temperature gets up to 70 degrees, oh, that starts a feedback loop. That flips the switch, turns off the furnace. Now the furnace is off, so the temperature is going to gradually drop, and once it drops a certain distance, maybe 5 degrees, the switch flips the other direction, turns the furnace back on, and it will continue running until the desired temperature is reached. And he noticed that the people who had this theory of how thermostats work adjusted them very seldom. I mean, they might turn them down at night when they go to bed and they really want the temperature to be lower, but they wouldn't keep fiddling with them throughout the day, and they didn't think that the house would heat up faster if they set the thermostat to a higher number. Now, here's the thing. As you've been listening to this description, I know that a lot of you were saying, oh, come on, you know, everybody knows how a thermostat works. And clearly one of those groups has got the completely wrong idea. But what you may not realize is that of those of you saying that, some of you are in that group that has the wrong idea. So this is the thing. We make mental models of how things work, and we adjust our behavior, how we interact with technology based on our ideas. And look, if it works, like my house is comfortable, I like the temperature of it, and I get that result by using the quote-unquote wrong mental model, it doesn't matter. It's functional. Now, it turns out that the second model, the feedback theory, is very much closer to reality. And if you have that mental model, basically your thermostat is a switch controlled by a thermometer, and it only has two settings, on or off, and it never causes a higher temperature to come out of your vents. If you have that mental model, that will lead you to make different decisions about how you interact with your thermostat, which will save you time and effort and probably save money on your energy bills. So I thought this is a great example that almost anybody could identify with. It doesn't have to do with computers. It's just, it's just the thermostat. But it shows how easy it is to have a mental model that isn't exactly, doesn't exactly correspond to reality, and therefore might lead you to make a slight mistake. Now, there's another category of mistaken mental models that I want to talk about, and that's miscategorization. So this is a kind of mistake that I've seen my two young sons make a lot. So like my older kid loves to put things in boxes, including himself. When he encounters new things, he invariably forces them into existing categories he's already comfortable with. Sorry, just, okay, great. So let's take this thing, all right? It's a telephone. All right, when my older son was about 2, he would pick up a remote control and try to talk on it like a telephone. In his mind, any oblong plastic box with buttons on one side must be a telephone because he's used to a telephone, and it's easy to see how he might make a mistake. These boxes look very, very similar to each other. But within a couple of months, he eventually understood that a remote control is different. A remote control is the thing we point at the TV to make it play his favorite shows. But then he became confused and frustrated when we got him a toy remote control that only made noise when he pressed the buttons. He would point this at the TV and press the buttons and nothing would happen, and he couldn't understand it. So in we were watching his mental model about these gadgets evolve, in almost in real time. First, he was putting all remote controls into the telephone box, and then he was putting all gadgets that appear to be remote controls into the really controls your TV box. So I would like to give you a few more examples of miscategorization. I mean, I could give you examples all day, but we only have a limited amount of time here. So I want to give you a few other examples that I found from the tech world that you may have encountered, and just say a few words about them. So here's the first one. I get this a lot, actually, and the miscategorization is that sync is in the same box as backup, or backup is in the same box as sync. So like a guy wrote to me last week or so telling me all about how he was going to use Dropbox for backup. And I'm like, nah, you're really not going to do that. Now, look, I use Dropbox. Dropbox is great. It's a very handy service, and it's fantastic. And I can see how you might think that it is the same thing as a backup, but it's not the same thing. A backup is something that gives you another copy of your file, all of your files, as many as you want, in another place. And yes, that place could be the cloud, it could be a server, and that server could be in the same room as the servers that Dropbox uses. But with Dropbox and most other similar cloud services, OneDrive and iCloud Drive and all these other ones, Google Drive, with most of, no, sorry, I take that back. Google Drive works differently, but with most of these syncing services, what will happen is you have a little designated folder on your computer, and you put some stuff in there, and then it syncs up to the cloud. And then if you connect to the same account with another device, then you can see all your same stuff. Great. Okay. Now, when you delete a file locally, it gets deleted in the cloud too. That's what sync means. It keeps the same thing everywhere. Now, to be sure, Dropbox and most of these other services will allow you to restore deleted files for a limited period of time. You know, in Dropbox's case, it's 30 days. And so in a sense, that serves as a limited type of backup, but only for the files that you put in that folder, and only for 30 days. And if you want to restore things because your cat walked over the keyboard and, you know, accidentally deleted some stuff, you're going to have to restore them one at a time. Now, with backups, the whole idea of backups is to protect you from yourself or your cat. So a backup, let's say it's a cloud backup service like Backblaze. It's not simply going to delete stuff from the backup because it was deleted locally, then it wouldn't be a backup anymore. So the idea of a backup is that it holds onto your things for much longer, potentially even forever. Holds on to older versions of things. So you accidentally make a change to a file, oh, but the previous version is still there in your backup, that kind of thing. So I can easily see why somebody might put those two things in the same box, but they really are quite different. And a backup service as well usually will not give you a view of all of those same files in a folder on all your devices. So it can be dangerous to put those things in the same box, in that you might end up losing data, and you don't want to lose data. Here's another miscategorization example. Ads on the web are just like ads on a billboard. Who cares? Yeah, we know companies have to advertise stuff. They will put ads in a newspaper. They'll put ads on billboards. They'll put signs up on the street. Aren't ads on the web basically just the same thing? And okay, they might be annoying if there are too many of them, but they're fundamentally just a one-way thing that causes no harm. Well, no, that isn't true at all. I mean, I think most of you probably recognize that that online ads are a very, very much different thing, in that simply displaying an ad on your screen isn't a one-way process. It's a two-way process in which the advertiser and or the publisher putting the ad on a page can learn a lot about you. They will learn what kind of computer you have. They might be able to track you as you move across the internet. They can tell what you searched for and where you had been previously and what kinds of products you want, and even things like how old you are and what your political party is and you know what street you live on. There are all kinds of things that companies can find out about you simply by the fact that you permit their ads to show up on your screen. I've written a whole book about this, and I don't want to get into that specifically now, but my point is that if you think of ads on the web as being just as harmless and innocuous as ads on a billboard, because those are one-way ads, then you are going to probably take the wrong actions that could leave you open to all kinds of things that you don't want, like invasions of privacy. Speaking of invasions of privacy, a lot of people still seem to think that Google is a search company. Now, I'm not talking about the split between, you know, Google as part of Alphabet. I'm not talking about how, yeah, the same company owns YouTube and all these other entities. I'm talking about the fact that Google doesn't get money from your searches. Google gets money from advertising. In fact, nearly all, the vast majority of Google's revenue is from advertising. So what Google is an advertising platform. And yes, they have a search engine, and yes, they have Google Docs, and yes, they have YouTube, and they have these other, you know, many other services. But for the most part, the services are not where Google makes its money. The services are simply a place to show you ads, a way to get more money, a way to get more information about you so that they can target ads more effectively and therefore get more money from advertisers. So if you think of Google as a search company, your interactions with them are going to be very, very different from how you would interact with Google if you think of Google as an advertising company. And this is true whether you are just a person searching the web, or you are an advertiser, or you are a publisher who wants to make money from ads. How you think about Google is going to determine how you, what kinds of decisions you make in whether or in what way you interact with their services. Now, so I've talked about the example of the plane that the 2-year-old didn't want to hit the moon, and the thermostat that people have different theories about. And I've talked about the putting things in the wrong box. But there are still many other examples of flip bits, many other examples of flawed mental models. Now, I talk about a whole bunch of these in this book I wrote. I just wanted to give you a few examples, because these are some things that you may have encountered, or you may know someone that encountered them. Now, I hope what I'm about to show you isn't too upsetting, doesn't hit too close to home. This is a true story. This has been witnessed in real life, and I've seen sort of variations on this. I don't want to shame anybody, but this is the way some people conceive of web searches. Now, the mental model that is mistaken is I can only get anywhere on the web from the Google homepage. So I want you to imagine somebody wants to go to the Apple website. All right. Somebody who has this mental model of I can only get anywhere on the web from the Google homepage wants to go and see what Apple has to say. So how would they do that? Well, this is the process that some people go through. They open up their browser, okay, browser window, and up in the address bar, they are going to type Google. They're going to type Google, and when they hit enter, of course, what's going to happen is that this page shows up. It's a web search, and hey, guess what? Google was the #1 hit for a search for Google. What a surprise. So that's how you get to the Google homepage, is you click that link. You have to click the link to get to the Google homepage, you understand? And then so they go there, and this is what they see. And now that they're on the Google homepage, they can type in the thing that they're actually looking for, which is Apple. Now this does another search, and it gives you a page of results. And oh, look, by sheer luck, Apple happens to be the very first hit. There it is. And if I click on this, then and only then will I go to the Apple website. Now look, I hope that for most of you, this was as painful to hear as it was for me to say. Every part of this series of steps was broken. So typing in Google in your address bar to go to Google is of course wasted effort, because you're already there. Typing something into your address bar executes a search right there. You don't have to go to a web page first. If you had just typed in Apple into that address bar, it would have immediately done a search for Apple, and you could have avoided 2 steps. But even that is also wrong, because if you typed Apple and lifted your finger off the keyboard for 1 second, you would have seen Google try to autocomplete apple.com, and then you would have just said, oh yeah, that's the one I want. If you didn't have, if you know, autocomplete might not be faster than just typing apple.com, which is the really, really fastest and easiest way to do it. But it's pretty fast. So when I see this, and I have seen a number of things along these lines, is like I'm in Starbucks with my laptop and I see the person next to me and I just cringe, because I'm like, okay, you got there, you did, you got where you wanted to go, but man, did you waste so much time and energy and effort to get there? And it's all because no one ever pointed out to you that, number one, that thing up in the top of the browser that holds the URL is also a search field. And number two, nobody ever explained to you that you can just go straight to where you want to be. You don't have to you don't have to use a search to get literally everywhere on the internet. So, and again, I would guess that the people watching this presentation don't have this problem, but you might know somebody who does. It might be a family member, a parent, or something. And if you correct your own mental models and help other people gently, respectfully to correct theirs, it can just make life go a lot more smoothly. Well, what about some other examples? You know, I've written a lot about passwords. I did a presentation last year for you guys about passwords. And one of the misconceptions I've heard is that, hey, as long as I have a great password, like, wow, it's really long and it's random and it's got all these special characters and whatever, it's safe to use it everywhere because it's a great password. And nobody could ever guess this password. No person could guess this password. No computer could guess this password. So if my password is unguessable, then what could possibly be wrong with using that password on every site in the world? Well, you know, what the thing about that is that on an almost daily basis, we read in the news about some big data breach. Could be Facebook, could be Instagram, could be, I mean, there have been so many companies, as well as, you know, like credit bureaus and the FBI, like whatever. Big organizations with millions or maybe hundreds of millions of passwords, they get hacked, or there's a bug, or somebody leaves a laptop in a car and it gets stolen. Something happens, and one way or another, that list of passwords for some particular site gets out. And now hackers have your password for some site. Now, maybe that site is Facebook and they don't really care about your Facebook account, but they do care about your email account or your bank account or something else. So they will try that same password that has been leaked everywhere else. And now, because you've used the same password everywhere, all of your accounts are at risk, and you got to go change them every place. So that would be another example of a flawed mental model that could be very dangerous for you. I see this one all the time. You know, we have a lot of customers, and I see what their email addresses are, and a lot of them end with, like, you know, Comcast.net or RR.com or whatever their local ISP is, and it hurts me to see that. Like, okay, you sign up for an account with your cable provider or your telephone company or whatever. So now you get internet service at home, and they are going to give you an email address for free. You actually don't have to use that ever. You literally never, ever have to use that email address. If you do, then one of the consequences of that will be that if you ever move or you ever switch ISPs, you switch internet providers, then that email address will break, and you'll have to email everybody that you ever corresponded with, or else just accept the fact that a lot of your correspondence is going to vanish into the ether. Just because you have an address doesn't mean you have to use it. There are lots of other ways you can get email addresses, including some that are free and many that let you use your own domain name so that it's completely portable. Here's another one. Speaking of email addresses, you know, again, we have tens of thousands of customers, and as on most websites, you know, you buy a book from us and you enter your email address, and that turns into your username. So if you want to log in later on, see what you bought, re-download the stuff you bought, of course, you're going to enter your email address. Now then people say, but wait a minute, I changed my email address. Maybe I had a, you know, Roadrunner address, and I got smart and I changed it to whatever, a Gmail address or something. And now, because that old address is no longer valid, it can no longer receive messages, I can't use it to log into your site anymore. But that's incorrect, because my site doesn't need to talk to your email server in order to log you in. My site just needs to know who you are. And your email address is what you use to tell us who you are, and your password is what you use to tell us that, no, it really, really, really is you. So even if you are using, you know, an AOL address that hasn't been active for 10 years, for us, it's just a username. It's just a string of characters. It means nothing other than who you are. And sure, you can change that on our site if you want to, but changing your email address doesn't prevent you from using that address to log in to all the sites where you used it as a username. And here's another one. I've also written quite a bit about encryption, including full disk encryption. And you know, there are a number of different ways that you can encrypt your whole hard drive or SSD, and it's a good idea to do that. It's a good idea to do that so that if your computer is stolen, then nobody who doesn't have your login password will be able to read anything on your computer. So that's a smart thing to do. It's good to encrypt all your files. But then I get people saying, well, because I encrypted all my files on my PC, that must mean automatically that everything that I synced to Dropbox is also encrypted, or that everything, you know, I email a file to my friend, that's also encrypted, or I copy a file onto another disk, that's also encrypted. Well, no, because that's how file-by-file encryption works, but that's not how full disk encryption works. And again, that's like another whole topic, which is not what I'm here to talk about. But it is an example of a plausible thing that somebody would think if they don't know all the facts of how what's inside the black box. So, speaking of which, how do you keep your bits from being flipped? Well, I mean, of course, you can go get a PhD in computer science and spend your career learning about all this stuff. I know some people with PhDs in computer science that still make mistakes. That would be great, but it's not necessary, and it's also not sufficient. So what can you do? Well, I recommend that you start at first by thinking like a 2-year-old. What does a 2-year-old do? Well, they use, let's say, a simplified, abbreviated version of the scientific method. They wonder about the world. They want to know why. They have endless curiosity. And how do they fulfill that curiosity? They ask questions. What's inside this box that causes it to make that sound? Where do babies come from? Why can't I eat ice cream for every meal? Actually, I don't have a good answer for that last one. I think you should be able to eat ice cream for every meal. But then they experiment. I mean, my kids like to experiment by throwing things. And, oh, look, hey, when I drop this thing, it separates into all these pieces. That's cool. It also seems to make Daddy say words that I don't hear very often. That's really interesting. Let me see what other things I can do to make Daddy say funny words. They experiment. Now, I might think their experiments are irritating, but at least they are trying to figure stuff out. How do things work? What causes what? And it seems to me that adults don't experiment with their computers and other gadgets very much because they don't understand them, and they're afraid that they'll do the wrong thing and damage the device or its data. And that makes me really sad, because for me, experimenting, that is playing with objects, is a great way to learn about them. So I'm encouraging you to have the fearlessness of a 2-year-old, also have good backups, when you experiment with your devices. Of course, there comes a time when you also have to put away childish things and think like a grown-up, because there are things that grown-ups are great at that kids aren't. So I encourage you in particular to pay attention. When somebody tells me an app isn't working right, I ask what happened, and they say, I don't know, it just quit, and there was some sort of error message on the screen. I say, well, what did the message say? And they go, oh, I don't know, I closed it without reading it. I'm like, oh, don't, the error message was there to tell you what went wrong and why. You have to read the error message. You have to pay attention. This is how you learn what is going wrong, and at the very least, it gives you something to Google. So pay attention to what you see. Don't be oblivious. Now, young kids tend not to watch where they're going. Oh, well, look both ways before you cross the street. They're not not necessarily aware of their surroundings and stuff. Now, we as grown-ups should have mastered these skills, but when someone wearing headphones is singing along with their tunes at the library, or is constantly shattering smartphone screens due to careless handling, I imagine that childish lack of self-awareness is manifesting itself. Another thing grown-ups do is they look up stuff. I regularly get people from email from people asking questions about software that are answered in the online help, or questions anyone can find in far less time than it takes to send an email message with a quick web search, or questions I answered in the book or article that led the person to me in the first place. So if you're confused or curious about something, your first step should be to consult obvious references and not to ask a stranger to find the answer for you. For some reason, grown-ups tend to shun documentation and they jump to the conclusion that if an answer isn't immediately obvious, they can't learn it on their own, but you can, and you should. So you need to think like a grown-up. Now, I do think that when you're asking questions, and this is my last slide, by the way, you should ask the right questions. Like, why? Why did I have to enter my password just then? What purpose did it serve? Why should I install the security update? The opposite of asking why is not caring. You should also ask how. How does my phone know where I am right now? How does IMAP let me see the same email messages on all my devices? How does encryption help me? These are both searches for reasons, but from different perspectives. So you can ask how and get a meaningful answer without knowing every last detail. And this will help you to keep your bits from being flipped. So I have a book, and the book is a little bit outdated, but I think most of what it says is still very useful and applicable, and it will help you learn more about this process of keeping your bits from being flipped. There's this URL at the bottom of the screen where you can save 30% on your purchase if you're interested in this book. And in fact, you can use, once you go to that URL, there will be a coupon code that's applied to your we set a cookie, so you can use that to purchase any of our books, and I hope you will check them out. So that's what I have to say, and I would like to know if there are any questions.
Okay, if anybody wants to type a question. Okay, I'll ask a question.
Yes, please.
What's the most common question you get? Common type of question?
I don't even know how to answer.
Is, but
Yeah, that's hard to answer because the kinds of questions I get are so varied. But very often they take the form of, I'm doing something on the web. Maybe it's, you're trying to order a book from us, or you're trying to go to a website and the thing that you expected didn't happen. Your order didn't go through, or you didn't get to the right page, or you got an error message, and people are like, and how can I fix this problem? And that kind of goes back to, well, what was there an error message on the screen? What did it say? Tell me exactly what effect you were trying to achieve, what steps you went through to get it. This reminds me, actually, this is a good thing. So I'm doing, sort of tech support with my mom on the phone. Now my mom's in her 80s and she has a computer, and we have Skyped together many, many times, but she's been having trouble getting Skype working. And when she's trying to describe to me what she's seeing, she's talking as though I can see what's on her screen. Well, when I click this thing here, I get this thing pop up. I'm like, okay, I need something more than thing. What did you click? What popped up? This idea that that the person on the other end will know what I'm talking about. Just if I send an email saying my order didn't work, or I send an email saying the link didn't work, well, what link to what didn't work? In what browser were you? On what platform? Tell me more. I think that questions involving insufficient context are very, very common.
Okay. Look like I'm the only one that's got questions. We've got one more.
Okay.
Okay. What type of books that are most popular? And what I'm saying is like step-by-step books, instructional books, history of something books. I mean, do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
I do. Now, for us, and I have to say, this is a little bit of a sore spot with me, actually. For us, the most popular books are definitely those that provide step-by-step instructions. You open this window, you click this button, you type in this, you click this other button, and then you get the result you want. Now, we have a lot of books that do that sort of thing, but I find them very frustrating because then, you know, we say, okay, here's how you solve this problem. There's 5 steps, you go through the steps, great, your problem is solved. Now, a week later, somebody encounters a problem that's similar, but a little bit different. The same problem with a different app, whatever. And now they have to go looking for the exact step-by-step instructions to follow to solve this slightly different problem. It's frustrating for me because I'm very much one of those teach a person to fish kind of guys. Like, I want you to solve your own problems and not have to pester me all the time, right? I mean, I love to help, but really, I want you to have problem-solving skills. And unfortunately, the books where we try to just give you background on how things work so that you can put 2 and 2 together yourself are much less popular because they actually require some thought. And I wish that the step-by-step instruction books were less popular and the how stuff works books were more popular, because you would be learning skills that can apply to lots of different areas and it could save you a lot of time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's a lot of the basics of user groups is walk me through it 5 times.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I have been a member of several different user groups, and I have given talks at, I can't even tell you how many user groups, and I get that, and I get that, you know, there's a difference between people who are using computers recreationally and people who work with computers for a living. But my fondest desire would be for people to not just say, well, I wanted this effect, so I clicked this button, but rather to say, I understand what that button does, so I can generalize to solve more problems by knowing a little bit about how the stuff works in the background.
Yeah, no, I just asked that to see, and it just said it goes with my perception that that's the how-to, and how to do something was the more popular questions.
Yeah.
One of them in here, I got to think about another 5 minutes. They were saying years ago, didn't the URL field require the exact characters to be entered? And if so, when did the URL field also become a search field?
Yeah, so that's true. Years ago, quite a few years ago, I can't even remember how long ago that changed, but once one browser changed that, all the rest said, oh yeah, I like that idea too. So for a long time, like Firefox would give you the option to have 2 fields, like the actual URL field and then a different search field. But I think now they've just kind of given up and said, well, everybody expects this one field to do both things. Chrome does that, you know, Edge does that, Firefox does that, Safari on a Mac does that. They pretty much all do that nowadays, is that they use the one field for either a URL or a search. Now, going back to like my example, if somebody wants to go to the Apple site, even back in the old days where the URL field was not also a search field, had I at that point typed just the word Apple, my browser would have said, oh, when you say Apple, I'll bet you probably mean apple.com, so I'll try taking you there first. So it was very common back in those old days to assume that if you just type a word without a .com or a www or whatever, that was where you wanted to go. So even back in those days, I think it would have, the example would have been approximately the same. But I would have to go back and look at historical versions going back certainly more than 10 years to figure out when browsers started integrating the search and the URL.
Good question. Let me come up with that final question here.
Okay.
How do you overcome dispelling computer myth without causing fear that they're doing something wrong?
Well, you know, if you start out being afraid, like, okay, so let's just say I've now met you for the first time, and I've given my little spiel, and you have been afraid about doing the wrong thing already for years. I mean, I'm not going to overcome that instantly. Like, I know from talking to my mom that this is not something that you can just turn off. And it may be that you are fearful for legitimate reasons. Like, there was that one time 5 years ago that you thought you would try something, and whoops, boy, did that have the wrong result. So I'll answer this in a couple of ways. One way is backups are your best friend. If you do not already have lots of really great backups for your computer, please, you know, this is a great thing that your user group can help you with. Please get your computer backed up really well right now. Backups are great for lots of different reasons, but most importantly is they take the pressure off of you, because you know, all right, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try something really, really risky, like installing a new operating system. I'm going to try something really, you know, a big deal. Well, if you have excellent backups, then even if the really scary thing fails and you lose data and you get the wrong result, like, yeah, it's okay. I got another hard drive over here. I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to put my old stuff back. Then I'm good to go. So if you have great backups, the worst thing that could happen is that you have to spend some extra time undoing the results of an experiment. So that would be my number one tip. But you know, my number two tip is experiment with a friend. So decide that when you are going to play, when you're going to just poke around with an app or with your computer and see how things work, have a geekier friend just kind of hanging around, looking over your shoulder, and say, now, I don't want you to tell me what to do or what not to do. I only want you to say, hey, stop, if I'm about to, like, do something really, really dangerous, and then explain to me what was dangerous about that so that I know better next time. Like, you know, when I first started using Windows, like, I don't know how much trouble you can get into using regedit. I found out. But, like, you know, you can get into trouble, sure. So, you know, have great backups and compete with a friend.